After camping out at Mount Sinai for about a year, during which time they received the Ten Commandments and the rest of the law, the Israelites have finally started moving again. Their rest stop beside the mountain accounts for much of the book of Exodus, all of Leviticus, and the first part of the book of Numbers. Now we find ourselves in a part of the text that some refer to as the murmuring stories. This isn't the first time the Israelites have murmured. Not long after they left their oppressive lives of slavery in Egypt, they began to murmur. Where would they get food? Where would they get water? Why didn't they just stay in Egypt, where they were at least ensured of basic provisions? God's response at that time was reassurance. When they expressed concern about starving, they awoke every morning to manna. When they asked for meat, the Lord sent quail. When they needed water, Moses drew it from a stone. A year later, however, the situation is different. The Lord has brought them out of slavery, provided their daily needs, given them guidelines for living in community, and made a covenant with them. The Israelites are Yahweh's people. The Lord's side of the covenant has been kept, so further questioning of their arrangement would no longer be met with reassurance. In the chapter leading to today's passage, the people are again murmuring about being tired of manna and wanting meat to eat. Moses laments about the burden of leadership to the Lord, who tells him to assemble 70 elders. These individuals are chosen to help shoulder the burden of looking after the people. After that, the Lord sends meat in the form of quail to the people, so many that it took a full day to gather them all. Following that, though, many of those who complained were struck with a plague. Bible scholar Thomas Dozeman writes that murmuring is no longer appropriate testing of God's providence after the revelation of law, construction of the community, and establishment of covenant at Mount Sinai. It is rebellion against God and the leadership of Moses. Now we find the Israelites continuing their journey toward the Promised Land. They are camped in a place called Hazeroth, and there Moses' sister Miriam and brother Aaron speak out against him. They take issue with him marrying a foreign woman from Cush. Then they seem to exhibit signs of jealousy, saying, "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" Moses, who is described as being the humblest person on earth, appears to say nothing in return. As Bible scholar Neely Fox remarks, Moses remains silent in the face of these accusations so that God takes up his defense. Indeed, the Lord does, calling the siblings together and saying, "When there are prophets among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly, not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord." Yahweh is angry that they have spoken against Moses. It should be clear by now that Moses is a prophet of the highest order. After the Lord leaves them enshrouded in a cloud, Miriam's skin becomes white as snow, signifying some sort of disease. Aaron says to Moses, "Oh, my Lord, do not punish us for a sin that we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like one stillborn whose flesh is half consumed when it comes out of its mother's womb." Moses in turn cries out to the Lord, saying, "Oh God, please heal her." Yahweh replies that Miriam will need to bear her appearance and be shut out of the camp for 7 days. She is, and after her return, the Israelites continue to their next stop. Some questions might emerge as you read this passage. Here I'll bring up some that I had, as well as responses that are informed by Bible scholars. First, why did Miriam and Aaron make an issue of Moses' wife being foreign? Scholars aren't entirely sure if they are referring to Zipporah, the woman he met in Midian after fleeing Egypt many years before, or if they are referring to a more recent marriage to a Nubian woman from Egypt. Fox suggests that the latter is more plausible since Nubia was part of the Egyptian empire and dark-skinned women were considered beautiful. Regardless, there are multiple mentions in traditional Hebrew teaching against intermarriage, so Miriam and Aaron were referring to a custom which Moses appears to have violated. But in this instance, God supports Moses over against traditional law, justified by his humility. You might also ask why Miriam was the one afflicted, when it appears both she and Aaron spoke out against Moses. Fox points out a shortcoming in our English scripture translation, writing that Miriam and not Aaron was punished because she instigated the gossip and vocalized it, as indicated by the feminine gender of the verb spoke. I find the nature of Miriam's condition to be unclear. Aaron makes it sound like she has been struck by a serious form of leprosy, but by the end of the story it seems her punishment is more about being sent away in shame for a week. That is more in line with laws about being unclean, which required a purification process before reconciliation. Aaron's plea to Moses might have over-dramatized the situation. It's his description that makes it sound like Miriam's life is threatened. Bible scholar Robert Alter highlights the contrast between his words and those of his brother. Moses' prayer is a mere 5 words and 5 syllables, devoid of any metaphorical elaboration or explanation of motive and circumstance, a kind of pure verbal distillate of imperatively urgent plea. The starkness of the language makes it all the more affecting. Compare Rabbi Rashi's comment on the urgency of the language. Why did not Moses pray at length? So that the Israelites would not say, "His sister is in distress, and he is standing and going on in prayer." Finally, there is the issue of humility, which seems to be a key trait of Moses. But what does humble mean in this instance? Dozman suggests that the humble are those who seek God, hear God, rejoice in God, and do justice and righteousness. He goes on to write about the leadership of Moses. Too often, charisma is used for self-promotion in our individualistic society. One reason for this is that charisma highlights individuals, hence the danger to confuse it with fame. Yet charismatic leadership is never about self-promotion. It is aimed at building community. The role of Moses in Numbers 11 through 12 provides illustration. He rejects self-promotion. He complains to God that his leading the people alone is inadequate. Thus it is Moses, the charismatic leader, who forces God to devise a way to pass on Moses' spirit to the 70 elders. His goal is not fame, but the distribution of his spirit to all members of the community, even when it threatens other leaders like Joshua. Numbers 12:3 states the ideal. The most charismatic leader is the most humble person on earth. Humility is selflessness before God and others. Such persons do not hoard power jealously, they give it away. In preaching and teaching this story, it is important to clarify that Moses is not a celebrity. He is a charismatic leader. I think that humility is something to which we are innately drawn and something to which many aspire. Someone receiving a compliment might reflexively try to downplay that gesture rather than simply accepting it. Politicians running for office will often cite aspects of their backgrounds that appear humble in an effort to be relatable or as evidence that they are self-made. The desire for humility is so strong that a few years ago we even saw the term humbled used errantly. For instance, someone accepting a major award would say they were humbled by their achievement. That's not quite what that means. You're humbled when your team loses a basketball game 99-30. You're humbled when you trip and fall in front of many witnesses. When you win an Oscar, you're not humbled. The effect is quite the opposite. But it's great if you humbly accept that Oscar. By the way, the irony of me pointing out the mistakes of others in a reflection about humility doesn't escape me. One of my favorite NFL players was Barry Sanders, who was a running back for the Detroit Lions. He was an elusive runner, able to escape would-be tacklers even when it seemed he was surrounded. That led to his scoring a lot of touchdowns. But regardless of how spectacular his run to the end zone was, his reaction was always the same. There was no dance, no choreographed interaction with teammates, no heavenward gesture, no celebration at all. He just handed the ball to the referee. He let his actions speak for themselves, and that's one reason he was beloved by fans. But as Mac Davis sang, it's hard to be humble. Regardless of how much we like the idea of humility, its pursuit requires us to push back against our pride. And that's where it gets tricky. We all need some level of pride to be mentally healthy, but not so much that we're overly proud. As we saw with Aaron and Miriam, that can lead to resentment and jealousy. Here they were, named prophets of the Lord, but that designation wasn't enough for them. Now we live in an age when self-promotion seems to be the rule of the day. Whether we're tweaking a resume, tuning our social media profile, or promoting our work, many of us have had to add marketing to our skill sets. I was reminded of this recently while completing a grant application for Intertwined. In it, I had to make the case of why our community is deserving of financial support. In a sense, I had to sell Intertwined. And for a while, I struggled with that because it seemed like self-promotion. But after a while, I realized that I was not promoting myself. I was promoting our community, and that made the effort easier. I wrote about what Intertwined has become, how you invite and welcome new sojourners, how you create an environment of safety and mutual support, how you serve meals to neighbors in need on Friday nights and Saturday mornings, and how you are politically engaged with the hope that will lead to there being fewer neighbors in need. Again, I was reminded of the importance of focusing on and pursuing the best interests of our communities. When it was time to choose someone to lead the people from Egypt, Yahweh's pick was the humblest person on earth. The humility of Moses would make it more likely that he would focus on the needs of his community rather than on his own needs. When you look at the law given by the Lord to the Israelites, much of it was focused on how best to live in community. And when pride threatened the health of that community, there were consequences. The reason humility is innately attractive to people is because it is innately attractive to God, whose image we bear. And when God came to live among us in human form, humility was one of Jesus' defining characteristics. One of the oldest hymns of the Christian church highlights that, reminding us that Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness. And being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. The will and trust of the Lord is understood most readily by the humble. And the converse is also true, as is evident by the cruelty being inflicted by the unapologetically proud on many of our most humble neighbors. As followers of Jesus, we best embody the gospel when we live from a stance of humility. Like Barry Sanders, it can be elusive, but it's always worth the chase. May it be so. Amen.